What's up, Wizards? This is Eric from Bane Alley Magic, and today we're getting back into Nicol Bolas, the Ravager. So I originally made a deck on Nicol Bolas. It was my first deck tech video, actually, if you want to check it out. And it was called Enter the Dragon. It was all about dragons entering the battlefield. And while it was a decent deck, I found it just didn't do enough, mostly because dragons are just so expensive. It's hard to get them to re-enter the battlefield again and again because of their high casting cost. And it was just hard to get enough of them out in general before I got blasted. So I made a new version of the deck. This one's all about hand destruction, which is obviously right on Nicol Bolas's text there. Each opponent discards a card. So right away our commander is causing people to discard cards. So I went with that route, and I found the deck not only does better, but it's a lot more fun, and it's a lot more annoying for your opponents, but not in the way that it's broken, but that just they get tired of handing you their graveyards over and over again, which is a lot of fun. So without further ado, let's talk about Nicol Bolas, the Ravager. It's a 4/4 legendary Elder Dragon, and it has flying. When Nicol Bolas the Ravager enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. And you can also pay 7 mana, 4 in Grixis, to exile it and return it transformed as Nicol Bolas the Arisen, legendary Planeswalker. And it's got 4 abilities. Enters with 7 loyalty counters. +2, you get to draw 2 cards. -3, Nicol Bolas deals 10 damage to target creature or Planeswalker. -4, put target creature or Planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And -12, you exile all but the bottom card of target player's library. So obviously that ultimate is really busted, but I don't think we'll ever get there because of the synergy we get by the -4 ability. You know, when he comes out as a creature, each opponent's discarding a card. If your deck is also making him discard cards in other ways, then -4 ability becomes relevant right away. You put any creature or Planeswalker from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It's just fabulous. And that's what kind of this whole deck is synergizing on, is the fact that people are discarding. It's really easy to find cards that make your opponents discard a card, but it's not easy to find cards that care. So what we want are not only cards that say whenever an opponent discards a card, but we also want cards that just interact with the graveyard in general, and that's going to help a lot. So into the creatures, we got Jace's Archivist. You know what? No. Before we get into the creatures, I just want to go back to Bolas and say, when you play him, you know, you're going to be the enemy. You know, it's kind of the theme of this guy, is he's nobody's friend. Nobody's going to like you because you're making him discard cards. It's hard to make alliances, so you got to plan on that. But I feel like this is a deck that's going to win games for sure. But, you know, you got to take some hate. You're playing the bad guy. But he just is a great commander, 4/4 flying. He has not bad stats for 4 mana, making people discard a card. He's got all these extra abilities. I mean, this is such value in one card, which is why this is busting things up in Standard and why its price is so high. It's not just because it's Bolas, it's because it does great things. Alright, so Jace's Archivist is a Vidalcan Wizard, a 2/2, and for 1 of anything and 2 blue, and for 1 blue and you tap it, each player discards his or her hand and then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So we can repeatedly make people discard their hands and draw cards, which always makes everyone mad. Everyone hates this. No one's gonna like you. Yeah, I know it's blue, which doesn't generally draw hate. This guy definitely draws hate. They'll try to get rid of him. And then we get into the Spectres, which I love with the Bolas theme. You know, he's so evil. They're so evil looking. They look like Grim Reapers flying on monsters. It's so cool. And they all make discards. They all have discard synergy, so it's great. So Doomsday Spectre is kind of an older card. 2 of anything, a blue and a black. It's got 2/3 and flying. When it comes into play, return a blue or black creature you control to its owner's hand. So you can kind of synergize with something entering the battlefield, hopefully. And then when Doomsday Spectre deals combat damage to a player, look at that player's hand, choose a card from it, and that player discards a card. So a great target for Doomsday Spectre's first ability would be Nicol Bolas, because then you can recast him and make everyone discard a card again. And The common theme of the Spectres is they deal combat damage to a player, and somehow they discard a card or exile a card, which I'll take. That's fine. Exiling their cards is great, as long as it's exiling their hand. Banshee of the Dread Choir is 3 of anything and 2 black for a spirit, 4/4, and it has Myriad. Whenever this creature attacks, for each opponent other than the defending player, you may put a token that's a copy of this creature onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking that player, or a planeswalker he or she controls. Exile the tokens at the end of combat. And whenever Banshee of the Dread Choir deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card. So we can be making all of our opponents discard cards. And what's great about having these abilities on creatures is obviously they're repeatable, you know, whenever they deal combat damage. Shimmyan Spectre is 2 of anything and 2 black for a 2/2 flyer. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player reveals his or her hand. You choose any non-land card from it and search that player's hand, graveyard, and library for all the cards with the same name as that card and exile them. Then that player shuffles his or her library. So, you know, this ability sounds like it's not as good in Commander. You still get to exile a card from their hand, just like all the other Spectres, and you get to search their entire library and look at all their strategy. So I think it's a great card for Commander. Even though you're not exiling more than 1 card, you just got to think of the value of just being able to look at an entire player's library, and you get to repeatedly exile cards from their hand. Fits the theme great. Of course, we got the old school Nicol Bolas, the original Elder Dragon, 7/7 flyer for 2 of anything, 2 blue, 2 black, and 2 red. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Nicol Bolas unless you pay blue, black, red. Whenever Nicol Bolas deals combat damage to an opponent, that player discards his or her hand. Whoa, I just realized it says deals damage. That means deals damage at all. So if you could play Arc Bond on Nicol Bolas right here, that would make each opponent discard their entire hand. So that's strongly making me think about putting Arc Bond in this deck, just because it synergizes with the OG Bolas so well. Very cool. Karu Mind Eater is a vampire for 2 of anything and a black. It's 1/3 and menace. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles a card from his or her hand face down, and you may look at and play cards exiled with Karu Mind Eater. So sort of like the other Spectre that's 3 hybrid blue-black mana, which I don't have in this deck because I thought this one was just a little better because it has menace and you know, it's, you know, maybe it's not better, really. Maybe the other Spectre is really better because it's got flying, kind of the same ability. I might actually put that Spectre in. But hey, this guy's not bad if you don't have that Spectre. Abyssal Spectre is a 2/3 flyer for 2 of anything and 2 black. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card. Dinrova Horror is really cool. It's 4 of anything, a blue and a black for a 4/4 horror. And when it enters the battlefield, return target permanent to its owner's hand, and then that player discards a card. So if that player already has no cards in hand, that means they're going to be discarding that permanent. Super good. I'm enjoying some 14 Hands wine today, the Merlot from a 2015 brand. It's, oh no, it's not Merlot, it's the Cabernet Sauvignon, okay? If you haven't tried 14 Hands wine, try it out. Great for Magic players anywhere. Straight from the Columbia Valley, like me. Alright, Hollow Spectre is a 2/2 Spectre with flying. When it deals combat damage to a player, you may pay X. If you do, that player reveals X cards from his or her hand, and you choose one of them, and that player discards that card. Blizzard Spectre is 2 of anything, a blue and a black. With a 2/3 flyer, when it deals combat damage to a player, you get to choose one. So that player returns a permanent he or she controls to its owner's hand, or that player discards a card. So if you do the same player twice, you might be having them discard that same permanent, just like Dinrova Horror. So boy, Sidraxis Spectre. It's Grixis to play it, so it's a blue, black, and a red for a 3/2 flyer. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card, and you get to unearth it for 2. So for paying 1 and a black, you return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste, and you exile it at the beginning of the next end step, or if it would leave the battlefield, and you only can do this as a sorcery. So you get to play this guy again, a really great Spectre. Actually, probably one of the best Spectres, just because it has Unearth on it. Croesus the Purger is a great addition to this deck. It's another dragon, 3 of anything, and a blue, black, red. Grixis, I'll call it from now on. And it's a 6/6 flyer. When it deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 2 and a black. If you do, choose a color. Then that player reveals his or her hand and discards all cards of that color. Alright, making them discard, discard, discard. Urgoros, the empty one, 4 of anything and 2 black. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card at random. If that player can't, you draw a card. Really cool that you get to draw a card finally off of a Spectre. And it's a 4/3 flyer. Look at that artwork too, really cool. What are these Spectres flying on? I have no idea. They're all flying on something different. Liliana's Reaver is a zombie, 4/3 zombie for 2 of anything and 2 black. It has Death Touch. And whenever the Reaver deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card, and you get a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Tapped. Very cool. Jin-Gitaxias Core Augur is 8 of anything and 2 blue for a legendary Praetor, 5/4. At the beginning of your end step, draw 7 cards. Each opponent's maximum hand size is reduced by 7. So unless they have Reliquary Tower, or that blue dinosaur, then they're going to have to discard their hands at the end of their turn. But you get to draw 7 cards at the beginning of your turn. So all the Praetors draw a lot of hate. Just be ready for that. If you're playing Jin-Gitaxias, you want to probably, attach Swiftfoot Boots onto him as quick as possible because people are going to be gunning for him. Absolutely. And then now we're starting to get into the cards that care that our opponents are discarding. It's really easy to find cards that make our opponents discard, but it's hard to find cards that care. So this is the last of our creatures that make a discard. It's Fel Spectre. When Fel Spectre enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card, and whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. It's a 3 of anything and a black to play, and a 1/3 flyer. Sangromancer is 2 of anything and 2 black for a Vampire Shaman, and it's a 3/3 flyer. We got so many flyers in this deck, it's awesome. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain 3 life, and whenever an opponent discards a card, you may gain 3 life. Dimir Doppelganger is 1 of anything, a blue and a black, and you may pay 1 a blue and a black to exile target creature card from a graveyard, and Dimir Doppelganger becomes a copy of that card and gains this ability, so it gets to do it as many times as you need it to. And it's originally a 0/2, but it won't stay that way for long as you're exiling creature cards from opponents' graveyards. Again, these are cards that care that your opponents have discarded. So Diluvian Primordial is 5 of anything and a blue, 5/5 flyer avatar, and when it enters the battlefield, for each opponent you get to cast an instant or sorcery from that player's graveyard without paying its mana cost, and then exile that card. So this and the next Primordial, Sepulchral Primordial, 5 of anything and a black for a 5/4 avatar with Intimidate, and when this one enters the battlefield, for each opponent you may put 1 target creature from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So what's really cool to do is you play the first one and you get some Reanimator spell out of somebody's graveyard, and then with that Reanimator spell you play the Sepulchral Primordial, and then you get to look through everyone's graveyard again and cast something from their graveyard again. And in the last game I played with this deck, these guys came out together like 4 times in the game, and everyone was getting really annoyed. I did it twice, someone else stole them from my graveyard, and they did it twice, and all the other guys are just like, oh man, just take my graveyard, leave my graveyard alone, please. It was fun. Consuming Aberration is 3 of anything and a blue-black. Consuming Aberration's power and toughness are equal to the number of cards in your opponent's graveyard. And whenever you cast a spell, any spell, each opponent reveals cards from the top of his or her library until he or she reveals a land, then puts those cards into his or her graveyard. So this thing gets huge, quick, and it makes itself bigger. Whenever you cast a spell, it just gets bigger and bigger. So a really big creature, a good addition to this deck. Rexiel the Risen Deep is 3 of anything, a blue, blue, and a black for a legendary creature Kraken. It has Island Walk and Swamp Walk, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you get to cast an instant or sorcery from that player's graveyard without paying its mana cost, and then exile it. And it's got a 5/8 stats, so really great card. I mean, it's unblockable for most decks in the game, considering most decks are multicolored. Most decks are going to have either islands or swamps. You are definitely going to be able to connect with Rexiel, and with your commander and with all the other cards making them discard, their graveyards are going to be full of instants and sorcery spells. So really synergizes great with Nicol Bolas. Lazov Dimir Mastermind, same thing. Blue, blue, black, black for a legendary shapeshifter. It's a 3/3 with hexproof. And whenever a creature card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, including their hand, you may have Lazov become a copy of that creature card, except its name is still Lazov Dimir Mastermind, and it's legendary in addition to its other types, and it gains hexproof in addition to this ability. So normally it's a 3/3, but as soon as your opponents discard something really big, this becomes that. It gains all of the abilities of that creature, and it also gains hexproof. Such a cool card. I've always been looking for a place to put Lazov. You know, it's hard to find a place to put him, but I finally realized discard's the way. You know, mill, just straight mill as a strategy is just really hard to pull off. It's hard to win a game doing a mill strategy. I feel like doing discard hand strategy is a lot better. Even though you got more hands to make people discard, there's plenty of cards that make your opponents discard their whole hands, or at least have repeatable discard effects, which work great in Commander. As far as mill strategy goes, you usually get to mill with a card one time, or, you know, mill makes people so much more mad. Also, I feel like mill, it rarely wins in Commander. It's hard to win with a mill deck in Commander, unless you just bust out some infinite combo. I think discard is a lot more fun, and it works. I feel like it works a lot better with Lazov, with a deck that you're going to actually win with. Direfleet Daredevil, 1 and a red for a human pirate, 2/1, first strike. What's important is that when it enters the battlefield, you get to exile an instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard. You may cast that card this turn, and you may spend mana as though it were any type to cast that spell. If that card would be put in an opponent's graveyard this turn, not into any graveyard this turn, you exile it instead. So again, you're filling up their graveyard. Direfleet Daredevil lets you cast the spells. Chancellor of the Spires, same thing, 5/7 flyer for 4 of anything and 3 blue. And when it enters the battlefield, you may cast an instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard without paying its mana cost. And you may reveal this card from your opening hand. If you do, at the beginning of your first upkeep, each opponent puts the top 7 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So another great flyer that cares that your opponents have discarded or filled their graveyard. Alright, now into some other creatures. Twilight Prophet is a new addition to a lot of my decks. Almost any black deck really can use this card. It's a 2/4 flying. It has Ascend, which means if you control 10 or more permanents, you gain the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have the City's Blessing, reveal the top card of your library and put it into your hand. Each opponent loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is that card's converted mana cost, which is super broken. I mean, most of the time these black cards are making you lose life, so the fact that lets you gain life is great. It's on a creature, so it also gets to attack, and it's every turn, so it's like a Phyrexian Arena on a creature that's gaining you life, and it's draining your opponents of life. So great. Get these now. I think these are going to go up in price eventually, just because it's one of the best draw cards, I think, in black. Nezahal Primal Tide, one of the best draw cards in blue. 5 of anything and 2 blue for an Elder Dinosaur. 7/7. Nezahal can't be countered. You have no maximum hand size. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, you get to draw a card. And if you discard 3 cards, you get to exile Nezahal, then return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So if somebody gains control of it, you can exile it and regain control of it. If you're just trying to chump block with it, someone's attacking you with a 20/20, you can chump block with it, and then in response to damage, you can exile it, so you get the block in, but then Nezahal comes back. Anyone tries to destroy it, exile it, mess with it, and anyway, you just discard 3 cards, and Nezahal comes back. Very cool creature, letting you draw a lot of cards. Kuranos, God of Storms, 3 of anything, a blue and a red. for Legendary Enchantment Creature God, 6/5. If you watch the other video, you know this is my one sentimental card. In every deck, I say there's room for one card that you're sentimental for, you know, that you're like, I really just want to try this card out. You know, it doesn't maybe exactly fit the strategy, but you're trying to test it out, see how good it does. It should just work in any strategy. And so for me, that's Keranos, God of Storms. So if you have cards like that in your deck and you got more than one, you need to narrow it down. You only have room for one sentimental card in every deck. Any more than that, you know, you're really pushing the limits there, and you're probably gonna be losing a lot of games because you need cards to synergize. You need almost every card in the deck to do something. So, but Keranos, God of Storms is great because it does multiple things. It's a 6/5 indestructible. As long as your devotion of blue and red is less than 7, it's not a creature. But what's great is you reveal the first card you draw on each of your turns. Whenever you reveal a land card this way, you get to draw another card. And whenever you reveal a non-land card this way, Keranos deals 3 damage to target creature or player. So part draw, part removal, part indestructible 6/5 creature. So I think it's great in the deck if we're just looking for a draw spell. This can go in almost any deck, I feel like. So I'm trying it out. Haven't got to cast it yet, though. So I don't know how good it is, honestly, from personal experience. So as soon as I cast it, I'm sure it's going to do great things. Another God, Thassa, God of the Sea, 2 of anything in a blue. For a legendary enchantment creature God, it's indestructible 5/5. As long as your devotion to blue is less than 5, Thassa isn't a creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1. And then for 1 and a blue, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. So this will get a lot of your specters through to make your opponents discard. Just getting your creatures through in general is fabulous. And being able to manipulate the top card of your library every turn is awesome, you know? Controlling what you draw. Combat Celebrant is 2 of anything in a red. If Combat Celebrant hasn't been exerted this turn, you may exert it as it attacks. When you do, untap all other creatures you control after this phase, and then there's an additional combat phase. And it's a 4/1, and what's really great about Combat Celebrant in this deck is if you are getting through with the specters and the creatures, making them unblockable somehow, or just they're not able to be blocked, then you get an extra turn where you get to hit all your opponents again, and they all have to discard that many cards again if you're getting through with all those specters or with, you know, Nicol Bolas. Alright, so Liliana's Caress. These are some more cards that are not creatures that care that your opponents are discarding. So it's 1 and a black. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. There's another version of this card. It's like Maga Mutate or Murder or something. It's good, but that one's 3 to cast, so I put this one in instead. I also don't have that card, so whatever. Raider's Wake is 3 of anything in a black. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. And it also has Raid. At the beginning of your end step, if you attacked with a creature this turn, target opponent discards a card. Alright, awesome. Waste Not, the classic discard synergy card. If you're playing any discard deck, you need Waste Not. It's an enchantment for 1 of anything in a black. Whenever an opponent discards a creature, you put a 2/2 zombie token on the battlefield. Whenever they discard a land, you get 2 black mana to your mana pool, and whenever they discard a non-creature, non-land, you get to draw a card. So basically, whenever somebody discards anything, you get power. Alright. Continuing, we got Geth's Grimoire. It's an artifact for 4 mana. Whenever an opponent discards a card from his or her hand, you may draw a card. Great. You get this out early in the game, you're going to be drawing a lot of cards. Dance of the Dead says a huge paragraph of text basically saying, get a creature from any opponent's graveyard and put it onto the battlefield enchanted with Dance of the Dead. That creature gets +1/+1 and enters tapped. And at the end of... Alright, I'll go ahead and read this stupid thing. It says, take target creature card from any graveyard and put it directly into play under your control tapped with a +1/+1. Treat the creature as though it were just summoned. The creature does not untap during its controller's untap phase. At the end of his or her upkeep, its controller may pay an additional 1 and a black to untap it. If Dance of the Dead is removed, bury the creature in its owner's graveyard. Whew. So much text, oh my god. But really good card. Gets you any creature from a graveyard and puts it on the battlefield under your control. So, works great with discard synergy. Same thing with Animate Dead. It's basically the exact same thing, except the creature gets -1/-0. I don't want to read this. Same thing as Dance of the Dead. Get Animate Dead. Continuing. Alright, Necropotence. is 3 black for an enchantment. It says skip your draw step, and whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. So that's one a lot of people forget. So if you see somebody playing Necropotence, make sure they're exiling the cards that they discard. The really important thing is you get to pay 1 life, and if you do, exile the top card of your library face down. Then put that card into your hand at the beginning of the next end step. And so it sounds weird, but what's important to remember is you can do this as many times as you want. So you can pay 20 life and draw 20 cards potentially. You still have to discard the cards, and whatever you discard is going to get exiled. So just remember that. But still, one of the most powerful draw cards in black, absolutely. Goes in any black deck. Jace, Ingenious Mind Mage, 4 of anything and 2 blue, is the first Planeswalker. It enters with 5 loyalty counters. For +1, draw a card. Another +1 lets you untap all creatures you control. And for -9, gain control of up to 3 target creatures. So, I mostly put this in here for the draw card ability. Also, I like the fact that Jace is working for Bolas, you know? Oh, so evil. And being able to untap all your creatures so they can block is really important, too. So, super cool. I said he was the first Planeswalker. I guess he's the second, you know, after Bolas himself. Nicol Bolas God Pharaoh is the next Bolas Planeswalker, 4 of anything in Grixis. Enters with 7 loyalty counters. +2, target opponent exiles cards from the top of his or her library until he or she exiles a non-land card. Until the end of the turn, you may cast that card without paying its mana cost. So, everyone loves that. +1 gets you each opponent exiling 2 cards from his or her hand. -4, Nicol Bolas God Pharaoh deals 7 damage to target creature or an opponent. And then -12, exile each non-land permanent your opponent's control. So yeah, just another busted Bolas Planeswalker. I like the +1 ability the most in this deck because, you know, we're trying to destroy the opponent's hands. So also, Planeswalkers work great in this deck because we got lots of flying blockers. Cruel Ultimatum is 2 of anything, 2 blue, 3 black, and 2 red. Target opponent sacrifices a creature, discards 3 cards, then loses 5 life. You return a creature card from a graveyard to your hand, draw 3 cards, and then gain 5 life. Painful Quandary is 3 of anything and 2 black. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player loses 5 life unless he or she discards a card. You'll make lots of friends with Painful Quandary. Torment to Hailfire is the start of our removal package, so it also helps us make people discard. It's X and 2 black. Repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices an online permanent or discards a card. It's really hard to get people to understand what this card is doing, so you gotta explain it to them several times. You say, you have to do this X times. So if say you paid 8, for 8 times, they need to lose 3 life, sacrifice a creature, or discard a card. 8 times, in any combination. Vandal Blast is 1 red to destroy target artifact you don't control. If you overload it for 5 mana, then you destroy each artifact you don't control. Any red deck could use that. Chaos Warp is 2 of anything in a red. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into his or her library, then reveals the top card of his or her library. If it's a permanent card, he or she puts it onto the battlefield. Really powerful because it's instant speed, and it's removal in red, which red doesn't usually get, and this is going to get rid of literally anything. Planeswalkers, lands, we don't care. Target permanent, gone. Cyclonic Rift. Yay. Hero's Downfall. 1 of anything and 2 black. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. Get him out of here. Nizium Mortars. 1 in a red. Deals 4 damage to target creature you don't control. Or if you overload it for 6 mana, 4 damage to each creature you don't control. Yay. Universal Solvent. 1 of anything for an artifact that says pay 7 mana and tap it. Sacrifice it to destroy any permanent. So important for those enchantments we have a hard time getting rid of. Mastermind's Acquisition, 2 of anything and 2 black. This is going in a lot of my decks now because not only does it let you tutor for any card in your deck, it lets you tutor for any card that you own even outside the game. So super cool. Mystic Confluence is 3 of anything and 2 blue. For an instant speed spell, you choose 3. You may choose the same mode more than once. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3 mana. Return target creature to its owner's hand or draw a card. All great choices. Counterspell. 2 blue. Counter any spell. Instant speed. Whisper Silk Cloak is 3 anything for an artifact. Equipped creature is unblockable and can't be the target of spells or abilities, and has equipped too. So that's a long way of saying it has Shroud. And being unblockable is really important in this deck, so we can get through that damage and make people discard. Same thing with Swiftfoot Boots. Equipped creature has Hexproof and Haste. It doesn't make it unblockable, but, you know, lets it attack right away, so it can hopefully get in that damage when they least expect it. And it is 2 to cast and 1 to equip. Now into the ramp, Mono Rocks. So we got Dimir's Signet. I don't need to explain many of these. Soul Ring. Izzet Signet. Dragon's Horde is a great new card. It's 3 of anything for an artifact. When it enters whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, put a gold counter on it. You can tap it, remove a gold counter from it, and draw a card. Or you can just tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So for 3 mana, this is a card with great value in any deck that has any dragons. Super cool Mono Rock. Fire Diamond, 2 of anything, comes into play tapped, and you can tap it to add a red to your mana pool. Hazoret's Monument, I got all the monuments in here. We got Hazoret's, we got Kefnit's Monument, and I got the other monument too, I guess it's out, there it is, Bontu's Monument. There's Charcoal Diamond, a little out of place, the version of the red diamond for black mana. And then we got the lands, we got 37 lands, you know, we got all, you know, your basic, you know, we got 6 swamps, 6 islands, and 5 mountains. We go heavier on the blue and black because that's what's mostly happening here is a lot of Dimir stuff, and the red is the cherry on the cake. Then we got a lot of non-basics, you know, I'll let you guys figure it out. I've talked about lands quite enough, and so I guess that's about it. So let me know what you guys think about the video. Please like and subscribe, and let me know what you would do differently, if anything. I'm sure there's a lot of cards that could go in here that I don't have, but I think this version, if you're looking for a fun deck to play, this one is a lot of fun. It's good times. I mean, your opponents hate you, but they hate you in, you know, the funnest way possible. Because who doesn't like defeating dragons, you know? Like, they won't like you, but they'll like the mission of trying to take you down. You know, they'll have fun uniting against you. You're going to be the arch enemy a lot of the time. But it's fun, you know, you got the power, you have the synergy, you know, because the most powerful thing in Magic is to have card advantage, and you're taking that advantage away from your opponents, which is the real important thing about the hand destruction deck. You're drawing cards, they're losing cards. You know, the ideal situation is that they have no cards in their hands at all, and you have all the cards that you want. And so it can get really busted, but it's a lot of fun. So until next time, guys, take care, take it easy.